Hello and welcome to Decision NYC with Ben Max. I'm Ben Max, your host and the executive editor of Gotham Gazette. The 2021 New York City election season is well underway and it's poised to be the most significant municipal election in decades. All of city government is on the ballot, and because so few incumbents are eligible to run for their current seats due to term limits, New Yorkers are electing many new office holders and the next roster of leadership for our city. There will be a new mayor of New York City elected here in 2021, as well as a new city controller, several new borough presidents, and many new city council members. And that's not all that's on the ballot. A number of incumbents are eligible for and seeking re-election, including the city's public advocate. And there's a very crowded and competitive race for Manhattan District Attorney and more. Party primaries are set for June this year, and the general election will culminate on November 2nd. This is the first full set of municipal elections that will feature both early voting and the new ranked choice voting system, which applies only to party primaries and special elections, and will have a separate show just on ranked choice voting. This city election cycle would be of enormous importance under more usual circumstances, but it's unfolding at a time of great crisis for our city, raising the stakes of the decisions that you, the voter, will make. The new wave of city leadership will quite clearly make or break the city's recovery from the devastation of the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on health, families, jobs, education, city government finances, and much more. It's also important to note that the city faced a number of immense crises even before the pandemic, and those have not gone anywhere. In fact, some have gotten worse. It's an important time of choosing here in New York City, so we're pleased to bring you this series of interviews with candidates running for citywide offices, mayor, public advocate, controller, as well as interviews with candidates for other offices. And there will be debates. These one-on-one conversations will help you get to know the candidates better, learn about their resumes, their backgrounds, their platforms, their vision, where they stand on key issues, and what they want to do with the office they're seeking. We hope this and other interviews will help you sort through your many choices and make informed decisions when it's time to vote. So today we're focused on the position of New York City Comptroller. The Comptroller is a citywide elected position and considered the city's elected chief fiscal officer and budget watchdog. The Comptroller evaluates most city contracts with outside entities, audits city agencies to find waste and inefficiency, makes recommendations and proposals to improve city government, as well as other services and entities that New Yorkers rely on. And the Comptroller is fiduciary to the city's 5 public pension funds that total approximately $240 billion in assets. So that's a broad overview of the role. And now we're joined by one of the candidates who is seeking to fill it. Joining me by Zoom is State Senator Kevin Parker, a Democratic candidate for New York City Comptroller. Senator Parker, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Max, for having me. I appreciate it.
So give folks a broad overview of your background, your resume, what brings you to this race, and then we'll get into a whole bunch of specifics about why you're running for controller, but a little bit on your background and resume.
Absolutely. Again, I'm State Senator Kevin Parker. I represent the 21st District here in Brooklyn. I am the Majority Whip as well as the Chairman of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee, and of course, a candidate for New York City Comptroller. I'm a real New Yorker. Having been born and raised in Brooklyn. I grew up in the Bushwick Projects until I was about 10 years old before my family moved to Flatbush. Went to public schools, PS 193, Huddy, Millwood High School, before going away to college. I've spent my whole professional life working in public service. I was a New York City Urban Fellow and worked for Ruth Messenger when she was the Manhattan Borough President, worked in the City Council for Una Clark, worked for the first Governor Cuomo, in the Economic Development Corporation. Well, at the time it was the Urban Development Corporation, now what is ESD, the Empire State Development Corporation. Worked on Wall Street at Payne Weber and worked for the state controller for a while before getting elected in 2002 and taking office in 2003. Since I've been in the Senate for 18 years, I've been on the Finance Committee the entire time and a member of the Banking Committee and Insurance Committee for over a decade. And I spent over a decade, believe it or not, as in the leadership of the Senate, as the whip, both the minority whip and the majority whip, and having had a distinction of being part of a small cadre that actually helped flip the Senate to Democratic hands, not once but twice. And so, in that time, I think I've developed, the experience. I've demonstrated leadership, but most importantly, a vision for what the city has been. I've been one of the people who've been very active as a legislator. And even last year in the middle of a pandemic, I passed more legislation than anybody else in both houses. Over 40 bills passed out of the Senate, 21 went to the governor, and 20 became law. And so I'm really hoping to bring that kind of effectiveness to the city of New York in the position of city controller.
Say just a little bit more. I want to just highlight a couple of things you mentioned. Say a little bit more about your Payne Weber experience and your experience working for the former state controller.
Being on Wall Street was very different for me. Having, again, prior to that, only having worked in both, government and in nonprofit organizations. There, I was in the government affairs department, working directly for the chairman and the chairman of Payne Weber and the president of Payne Weber, and then simultaneously helping out on municipal finance deals. And so, I did both state, city, and federal lobbying. I was the PAC director and oversaw the political action committee for the company.
So you have some insights from the inside. Okay.
Absolutely.
And for the state controller?
And when I worked for the state controller, I was the deputy director of government affairs, essentially handling government affairs for the state controller downstate. And so that was kind of up to Rockland. So I dealt with Westchester, all of New York City, all of Long Island, and funny, Buffalo was in my portfolio. And there I maintained relationships with the state controller between other elected officials, between union leaders, between communities, and obviously between the governor, and the state legislature, both the Senate and the Assembly.
So what is it about the job of city controller that appeals to you? This is not a job necessarily that a lot of people jump at. It's got a lot of technical aspects to it. Obviously, as you've already discussed, there's pieces of your resume that align, with the different types of things that I said in the beginning about what the controller does. But why does this role appeal to you?
Well, I feel like as you hear my background, that my background has been actually culminating to this moment, right? Having all the work I've done in the finance committee, having overseen huge budget deficits, one in 2004, one in 2009, one in 2010, all of them over $5 billion worth of deficit each time, and in fact almost $10 billion in 2000 and 2009. And so I think that as we go out of this pandemic and where people are both fighting for their lives and their livelihoods, you need somebody who has the kind of experience that I've had, understanding government, understanding the possibilities of how to use public policy to make people's lives better, but also somebody who's going to have the leadership, both to work with the mayor and the city council on things of common concern, but also be a check and balance to those other branches of government when things are not going the way that they need to go. And I certainly reflect that in my background. But the most important thing, again, is vision, is understanding that we're not going to cut our way out of this, that we're not going to tax our way out of this, is that we're going to need to build our way out of this economic crisis, and being bold enough and strong enough to help be in that conversation and bring people together. And I think when I talk about my legislative record, people who understand legislation understand how hard it is to make law. And so when you see that I'm the person who's been able to make law more often than most people in the legislature, that shows my ability to bring people together in a common process for the common good. And if I could do it for the whole state of New York, I'm certainly sure that I can do it for the city.
Are there one or two bills that you'd point to that you'd say, these are my bills, I got them passed, and they're most relevant to this run for New York City Comptroller?
Absolutely. We'll look at just something that we did just recently, which is the utility moratorium. As you know, I'm the chairman of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee. And so as the pandemic hit us and we started, seeing issues with people obviously not being able to go to work, so they're not having income, so they can't pay their rent. They also can't pay their utilities. And so if you notice, there has not been a big conversation about people not being able to pay their utilities, because we actually put together very early a bill that I passed and made law that created a national model on how we should be creating a moratorium about people's utilities. And so we're actually probably about to do a second round of that. But that's something that we did to protect homeowners and renters and anybody who pays utilities in the state of New York. And I think that was really important. And again, shows a technical aspect, but then simultaneously an understanding what the day-to-day needs for people are, and how we address those things and bring people together to get that done. Another piece of legislation I'll I'll highlight is a piece of legislation on police reform. As you know, the state of New York was the first state in the country to put together a comprehensive package of police reform initiatives after the murder of George Floyd. We put together 10 bills. 4 of those bills were mine, right? Including a 911 false reporting bill that people obviously are familiar with it, as people dealt with the issue in Central Park with the woman with the dog who called the police on the man who asked her to put the dog on the leash, right? And I already had the legislation that addressed that issue. In addition to another piece of legislation that created body camera program for state police. Again, in this time of transparency and accountability, that program was absolutely necessary. And I think, again, that kind of vision and that ability to bring people together on very tough issues and get things passed and get things made into law is the same kind of skill and ability I want to bring to the city comptroller's office.
So you already alluded to this, but the city's obviously facing some serious budget challenges. They might not be quite as bad as they are now when the next comptroller, the next mayor take office, depending on what comes from the federal government, of course. And there's been a lot of money flowing from the federal government to the city and state. But in these challenging fiscal times, you said earlier that you don't think we can cut our way out of it. We can't tax our way out of it. Say a little bit more about what your philosophy is there in terms of addressing the city's budget deficits and the city's economic picture.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Well, first, we are going to need more stimulus from the federal government. Don't get me wrong, right? But we expect to get that. I think New Yorkers did the hard job first by electing Biden and Harris and helping out to win 2 Senate seats in Georgia that is going to allow Democrats to control the federal government and get us the money that we need, right? So I expect that with my constituent, Chuck Schumer, at the helm of the Senate, that New York will get its fair share in terms of stimulus. In addition to that, state legislators like myself are going to have to work with the governor to get the fair share from the ultimillionaires in this state and get additional progressive revenue from that manner. But that's not going to be enough, right? It's going to plug gaps maybe this year, next year. But if we talk about the long-term sustainable growth, we're going to need to build our way back into prosperity. And I really think that we have an economy that's moving from Wall Street to Main Street. And I know in my community, the main streets are Flatbush Avenue and Ocean Avenue and Church Avenue and Utica Avenue. And those businesses that were closed have to be reopened. And I think the city comptroller has a great responsibility and a great opportunity to provide access to the resources that people need. We know that small businesses need access to capital. They need technical assistance. We need to provide those things. One of the things I want to do is help provide more small business development centers. In Brooklyn, the 3rd largest city in the entire country outside of the rest of New York and LA, we literally have 2. There's 4 in Manhattan. There's only 2 in Queens, which is parenthetically probably the 5th largest city in the entire country, right? And so we need to do better in terms of putting things in the community. And I would love to work with CUNY and the SBA and members of Congress like Nydia Velázquez, who runs the small business committee in the Congress, to bring the resources so that we can hand those things out. The other thing is that in terms of the pension funds, is that we need to be investing our pension money in funds that are investing in New York City. Again, providing infusions of cash for these very cash-strapped businesses. Again, most people in New York City work in small businesses. So if we don't have a small business strategy, then we're not serious in terms of rebuilding our communities. This is particularly true in Black, Latino, Asian, and women-owned businesses. And in these communities that have been frankly hit harder than mainstream white communities.
Small businesses, there's often, a lot of challenges in even normal and good times. A lot of small businesses don't make it. That's especially true, I think, with restaurants. A lot of restaurants, go under, many make it, but a lot of those ventures don't. Hearing you say you want to move pension investments into funds that will support small businesses, is there any concern there that you wouldn't get buy-in from the pension fund boards in terms of moving some of that money into things that may be riskier investments? How do you think about what you would do in terms of those recommendations? There's obviously this big divestment conversation unfolding as we talk in terms of divesting the city pension funds from fossil fuel companies. 3 of the pension funds look like they're going to, 2 have yet to sign on for that. How do you sort of approach that philosophically?
Well, the first thing is, again, when we talk about the pension fund, if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. And so every decision has to be brought up against the criteria of, does this make money for pensioners? The first kind of goal is to make money for the pensioners and not to have to get money from the city in order to pay those obligations, right? And so I expect that we'll work collaboratively with the trustees of the various pension boards to look at these options in terms of funds that makes most sense and that properly balances risk and reward, right?
Mhm.
That's the first piece. The second piece is that I think that I applaud what's been happening so far in terms of divestiture from fossil fuels. As the chair of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee, and as somebody who has actually spent more time on that committee than any other legislator who's currently serving in the state legislature, I understand this issue, better than most, and really the only candidate that actually has some experience building a clean energy economy. And so another aspect of how we build our way out of this recession is going to be through the clean energy economy, right? And it's going to be not just with solar panels on buildings, but all the ancillary things that are related to it. How do we encourage research and development to relocate to New York? How do we expand
I'm a little
hydro in other
surprised.
areas?
I'm a little surprised that you're so in favor of the divestment from fossil fuel companies, because there is this argument that says you can be more of an activist shareholder and push the companies towards the types of change that you want to see if you stay in.
Right.
And we've seen the city do that. We've seen the comptroller's office do that on the state and city levels. And also just some of the things you just mentioned, the big fossil fuel companies are also doing green energy, right?
Agreed.
They're not stupid. So
Agreed. No. And
yeah,
that's why you need somebody like me who understands the intricacies, right? So you'll take a company like National Grid, right, which is a gas company as we think of primarily, but they're also the largest sustainable energy company in the state of New York, right? And so clearly they're a utility that you would work with in order to do that. So this is a lot. There's a lot of gray here. There's not you're in or you're out, but there are some companies that simply are not in that wave, and there are some companies that are not doing things that we think that we should approve of, like frack gas, right? And fracking, that certainly we're not going to be investing in. And so I think it's going to be very meticulous. The devil's going to be in the details. And again, but I'm somebody who understands those details and has actually helped the state move in that direction, having both helped negotiate the CLCPA and being the sponsor of the CCIA bill that rolls out the kind of the next phase of our modernization of our energy resources.
Mm-hmm. Has New York City spending, everything was going along in kind of boom times and unemployment was pretty low. The city economy was humming, millions and millions of tourists, et cetera, et cetera. And then obviously the pandemic hit and things came crashing down. But was city government spending a bit out of control before that? There was a significant savings cushion, but city spending had grown by over $20 billion a year under Mayor de Blasio's tenure. Was that growing too fast and there wasn't enough put aside? What was your sense of where the city budget picture was before the pandemic?
Yeah, my sense is that the city budget was growing a little fast. I think there was enough put away, but let's also be very clear. No one predicted this, and no one would have predicted that our economy would have been down as long as it was. And a lot of that really had to do with the federal government and the fact that we didn't get help from the federal government, and that the federal government politicized the pandemic instead of addressing it as Americans. And so, I don't think there was any way to kind of properly prepare for what we saw. And so, I think that when you look at the pre-COVID economy, it was actually built on a solid frame. And that's why I'm so optimistic about what the future can be and what the possibilities are if we in fact pay attention to the right areas. And we see this as Wall Street, even though we sit in the shadow of Wall Street, and we see this as a Wall Street thing, then we'll get what we got in 2009 and 2010, which was a jobless recovery. The reality is that New Yorkers want a hand up, not a handout. And so we have to put them back to work. And that's why I'm saying small businesses, building a clean energy economy is going to be the beginnings of how we work together in order to rebuild our city to progress.
Are there structural things about city spending, about city budgeting that you want to see changed? For example, in that budget growth, the city had really increased the personnel headcount of city government. The mayor has already been bringing that down by several thousands through attrition, not through layoffs. Are there things related to personnel? Are there things related to whether municipal employees pay into their healthcare premiums? Are there things related to those long-term benefits? Are there things structurally about the city budget, city spending that you want to come in as controller and try to change?
Yes, absolutely. But I also think that the way that city workers are being treated is fair and appropriate, and we should be certainly protecting both the health of city workers and their pension benefits in order so that they, after they've given so much to the city, that they can continue to live their lives in this city and thrive. But simultaneously, I think that we can look at the capital budget of the city and make some changes there. I think we can certainly look at the economic development budget and see some places in which we've probably been a little bit more generous to some companies than we needed to be. And those are places that I would begin with in terms of looking for some of the structural problems that we have.
And on the capital budget, what are you referring to?
Everything.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the question of what projects are we doing, and then what are we getting out of the projects? And what do we find both on the state and the city level is that oftentimes, we're paying for jobs that never materialize, and we have to, look at those things and make sure that these are projects that make sense and that align with the priorities of the city, and that's where we have to start looking.
Are there city agencies that you would particularly focus in on in the audit powers of the controller's office, in the policy proposal area? Those could be different answers, of course. There's agencies you might focus more on the audits, and other areas of city government you might focus on the sort of policy proposal aspects of the office. But on those two functions, auditing, which is much more a core responsibility of the office, and then policy proposals to really change public policy, are there specific city issues, city departments that you would focus in on?
Absolutely. I'll give you two, for example. The first is the NYPD. Again, I've been the leader in the state legislature on the issue of police reform. I know that people are fond of talking about defunding the police, and I don't necessarily like that term because it doesn't actually tell you where to shift the investment. And so I think that we really ought to be looking at how do we, in fact, create a police department that both serves and protects, but does so with dignity and respect. And we have to add more transparency, more accountability. And I think that's what an audit of the NYPD can certainly bring us. Since we passed that historical package of police reforms in the state legislature, I've written 15 other bills, including a bill that creates an NYPD residency requirement, another bill that creates a non-police response for homeless and mental health calls, which I think is going to be, again, critical, and a bill that actually defines excessive use of force in the law, right? And so I think that those are places to kind of look, but I think we have to look at how we're spending money, in this $6 billion agency, and figure out how do we, not defund the police, but shift resources in a way that aligns with New Yorkers' values, and use, frankly, police functions when we absolutely need them, but find other ways to manage our city in crisis that doesn't require the police. Another area I would look at is homeless services. When people talk about homelessness, it's really, I'm gonna make it basic, but two sets of people, right? There's the hidden homeless. Those are people sleeping on your couch, Max, and my couch, and a friend's neighbor's couch, right? Who people frankly don't care about because they don't see them. Who, when people talk about homelessness, they primarily care about the people they see who they have to step over on the street, people who they may be sitting next to on the subway, who they know slept there that last night. And a lot of times those folks are dealing with mental health issues. Sometimes they're self-medicating with alcohol or drugs. And even if you had an apartment, even if it was supportive housing, and you walked up to them and said, here's a key to an apartment right next to where you are, they may not be ready to take that apartment. We really need to audit and look from a policy perspective, that pipeline from getting somebody off the street into supportive housing, and how does that work, and how do we streamline that and make it both better and more efficient. And those are just two areas that I would begin in terms of looking at improving our city.
So in our last few minutes here, I want to kind of come back to where we started. Your resume, this big promotion that you're asking city voters to give you, just like your competitors in the race, you're asking for a step up here to citywide position. I want to come back to some of your experience in terms of the teams you've managed, but I also want to ask you, you've had a history of aggressive incidents, of some violent incidents, some threats, some verbal outbursts. Do you think that history lends itself to a promotion to citywide office? And what do you say to voters who might be concerned about it?
Well, first, I think that one, I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago. I don't think you are either, right? And I think that I've grown into this position over the 18 years that I've been there. I also want to contextualize some of the comments that people have made or incidents that people talk about. Being now the majority whip with a supermajority is a very, very different job than it was in 2009 when I was the majority whip. And we had 32 votes when you needed to have exactly 32 votes to even open up the chamber, right? And managing with people like, Councilman Ruben Diaz Sr. and, Carl Kruger, who wound up in jail, and managing under, people like Pedro Espada, who wound up in jail, right, was a very, very different dynamic. And battling the IDC, in their very early stages when they were still part of our conference was a big part of it. So when I talk about having to flip the Senate twice, that wasn't an easy experience. There was a lot of work that needed to be done. Now, would I handle things now the same way I did then? Probably not. But in those moments, it was a very different dynamic. Mm-hmm. And I just want to, we've done a lot of great work during that time. I continue to represent my community with all my heart and all my passion, and I'll continue to do that as city controller. I want people to remember that you're not going to change the world with a whisper, and so you're going to give me a chance because I'm going to be the person who's going to stand up for you, and I'm going to champion the things that are important for New Yorkers and things that are important for our great city.
Is there something you can point people to say, this is work I've done on myself to ensure that there won't be incidents like this again? Is there?
What I will point to is the fact that I have been the majority whip under 3 leaders and over 10 years. There's probably no one who's currently serving in the state legislature who's been in leadership as long as I've been in leadership, right? And I'm saying that if you trust the leadership of the people who are leading the state legislature, they're the ones who lean on me and put me in a position where I'm in charge of democratic discipline. And so, in fact, which by the way is an oxymoron. It's kind of like being the overseer of a cemetery, right? You have a lot of people under you, but nobody's listening. Uh-huh. So this is a dynamic that, again, has been very different over the years because you haven't needed somebody to be an enforcer to change the culture of a 70-year-old organization that had been in the hands of Republicans. Mm-hmm. So if people like what they see in terms of police reform, we did walking, wild trams, dealing with democracy reform, making more opportunities for, MWBEs. That happened because we have a Democratic Senate. And let's be clear, the Republicans in the New York State Senate did not go quietly into the night. And by the way, there was a bunch of Democrats along the way, but who were playing footsie with them, and we had to deal with them as well. And so that wasn't a short process. It wasn't an easy process, and neither is going to be dealing with the pandemic that we have now. And so you need somebody who has gone through tough times.
I do have to leave it there because we're hitting time, but I think folks got a good explanation from you in terms of some of the stuff we talked about, and then your pitch on your leadership. So this has been a good conversation about what you want to do in the controller's office, and also your background, your resume, and your work in the state Senate. So State Senator Kevin Parker, a Democratic candidate for New York City Comptroller, I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Ben Max, thank you so much. I appreciate it as well. Take care.
And thank you for watching Decision NYC with Ben Max. Key decisions for New York City voters are coming up in the June primaries and fall general election. There's a lot on the line for all of us and the future of our city. I hope this conversation and others are helpful to you. I'm Ben Max. See you next time.